Welcome, Brooke. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thanks, Zibby. This is so great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay, your book is Huddle, How Women Unlock Their Collective Power, which is
Yeah.
amazing and exciting and inspiring.
Thank you.
Um, and in the book, you not only interview so many women across so many industries and races and backgrounds and
Yeah.
everything, but
Yeah.
you share so much of your own self with us, which
Mm.
I really, really appreciated.
Mm.
So tell me a little bit more, and I know you talk in the book about it, but tell listeners how you came up with the idea to do this book, including your little text exchange with your girlfriends and your
Totally.
own huddle and,
Totally. Totally.
all of that.
Well, it's a funny thing, as a journalist, I am happiest, I feel like, and best trying to like let someone else shine. I'm the one asking the questions, and so I don't always open up. But I felt like, for the reader, if I'm interviewing all these various women and telling people to huddle and how to activate and nurture your own huddles, like, damn, I need to like tell everyone a little bit about myself and why I feel like I have a bit of some knowledge on the subject, right? And so, how did I? Born and raised in Atlanta, was always loved, girls, women led a bunch of huddles, probably ran for girls class president more times than like should have happened. But so I was always part of, girls are leading girls. And then I dove into journalism. I graduated college, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, go Heels. And I dove into journalism, which has been the most spectacular thing for me in my life for the last 20 years. But as a result of that, I put career first. And so I was living in like small town America and was like working all the worst hours you can ever imagine, weekends, holidays, overnights, the whole thing. And so I never had a huddle. Like I was huddle-less in my 20s and in my 30s. And so I came to CNN 13 years ago, and around the 2016 presidential election, I was zigzagging the country. I just had noticed women showing up in ways I'd never noticed in my 20-year journalism career. And then there I was in Washington. I don't know where you were on the Women's March Trump inauguration weekend, but on the Saturday, I was embedded in the Trump motorcade. That's where CNN put me. So I'm literally like balancing on the back of this flatbed truck as we're meandering down Constitution as this newly elected president, Donald Trump, is heading to the White House for the first time. And I'm not going to lie, Zibby, like as a woman, as a journalist, I was a little troubled about what the next 4 years would look like, but tried to maintain my objectivity as I was reporting live that day. Then the very next day, I'm back on the clock for CNN. I'm in the middle of the Women's March in Washington. And I have never in my life been around so many women ever. I mean, that was 500,000 women showing up. In which I just was it was my aha moment where I had, filed away that women were showing up in ways I'd never seen before. Here I am in the middle of, as I describe in my book, the mother of all huddles. And bam, like that's when I knew I needed to dedicate the next chapter of my career to spotlighting, whether it's well-known women or ordinary, extraordinary women. And thus that was like the unofficial beginning of my huddle journey.
Wow. And the journey took you from like buses at the march to like Reese Witherspoon and Hello Sunshine
Yes.
production to the class. I mean,
Yes.
like to horrific traumatic situations. I mean, you were all over the place.
Yeah.
And I feel like towards the end, when you talked about the power of huddles with the nurse, I can't remember her name. That
Emily
was the
Fawcett,
most
Lennox Hill.
moving, right? That was so moving. Tell everybody about that because like,
Well, listen, I knew that, obviously I'm writing this book in the middle of a pandemic, in the wake of the George Floyd death. I talk a lot about Black Lives Matter and those three women founders. And then, of course, I wanted to dive in with a nurse. Thank goodness for our frontline health employees, right? Our frontline workers. And so Emily Fawcett is a woman right around our age who, a little bit younger, works at Lennox Hill as a nurse. And she was just telling me her story. Actually, I had her on my show. She actually started this whole thing called like Hope Huddles at Lennox Hill in Manhattan among folks who worked on her floor at the hospital when it was like the worst of the worst in Manhattan. And she told me about how it was her personal friend huddle who just really sustained her, how she was able to survive. We thought we had it bad just living in Manhattan or, being in America and, dealing with this pandemic. But can you imagine? She was telling me the story of this one day she had to watch 5 different people die. And it was her girlfriend who held space for her, who dropped off lunch for not only Emily, but like every nurse in her unit, or, you know, provided donuts, or what, you know, who did the grocery shopping for her and like left it at her, you know, at her apartment door. And it was this one particular girlfriend that, you know, after she had had that horrible day when 5 people had died, that she just let her sit on the phone and weep. And that is what huddling is all about.
Oh, it literally like makes me want to cry. Like I get the
Mm,
chills just hearing about it. And,
mm.
you know, because like, what can you do? Like, what can you do as a friend when someone's grieving or going through something so awful? It's
You
like,
hold space
you
and you
just,
listen.
yeah, you
Listen.
just, anyway, and you know, all the time I've spent thinking about the pandemic, which has been a huge chunk of like mental real estate this past year, like for most people,
Totally.
I had never really thought about what girlfriends were doing to prop up their friends who were nurses. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like
right.
it's just like that element never, like, of course of course nurses and doctors in general, yes, of course, I just didn't imagine people showing up like that and giving like spa baskets and like
Yes.
helping get through the day to day.
Yes.
I'm so happy that was in place for some people. That was,
Exactly.
you know, such a gift.
Yeah.
So there's so many different kinds of huddles, and
Mhm.
one you talk about in the context of how many really atrocious things you've witnessed,
Mm. As
from
a journalist at CNN,
as
you
a
mean?
journalist. I'm sorry, as a journalist from like
Yes.
Parkland and just like all the
Yes.
nationwide traumas. You're like there on the front lines,
Yeah.
and you wrote about, and I want to hear more, like people ask you all the time, you said, like how you get through it. And I hate to ask anything people ask you all the time, but I really like you're so close to all of that,
Yeah.
so often, or you were at least. And you said that the class,
Oh,
is one way to get through it. That So tell me about that as a coping mechanism, and also just in general, what else you have found to be really helpful.
have you ever been? Have you done the class?
I have not. I've heard a lot about it, but
Okay. Okay. I mean, let me. All right. For everyone listening, the class is, how do I describe it? It's this workout. And so I have my wellness huddle, and a lot of people do the class with me, and now obviously virtually. The class is kind of like this funky combination between, you know, your workout, you're at the gym, but it's also church and it's also therapy all together. And in normal times, we're all like packed into this Tribeca studio, sweating, moaning, grunting, yelling, crying, and listening to amazing music. And if that sounds weird, like it kind of is, but I don't know. I think that I've done so many workouts and I love sweating, right? But there's something about being in a room moving with predominantly women, all in there, who not just want a good workout, but who really want to drop into themselves. That's a phrase that a lot of the instructors use, right? So it's all based upon, it's amazing music. And Taryn Toomey, who founded the whole thing, and JC Gossett and Natalie Kuhn, who are these founding teachers, you know, they talk about neuroplasticity. And I'm gonna do my best to try to explain basically, like when when you're moving your body, doing the same repetitive motion for an entire length of a song, you don't have to worry about funky choreography or like running on the bike and getting back down and moving to the left and moving to the right. Like you're doing the same thing the whole time. And so in that space, you're like rewriting the grooves in your brain, and you're able to think more, I don't know, deeply. And as a result, I have just found myself feeling myself more, thinking more deeply, owning my own body, not feeling competitive, not looking at the person next to me, feeling more comfortable in my own skin. I mean, and I had always been like I did the class and Forward Space and Alita and a couple other things, but for me, through the pandemic, these women have just really been my lifeblood. Like I started doing the class almost every day, and I write about the class because of how it is really one giant huddle. It's a company founded by women. It's run by mostly women. It's mostly women in these classes. And actually, one of my favorite people who I used to move next to was this man, is a man. But that is a perfect example of a wellness huddle, and also how that can translate in the pandemic, and how you can move virtually with people. And I still feel connected, you know, even though I'm by myself in a room, you know, I'm still connecting with the instructors. I'm still, you know, texting with various people who I move with. And I just, to have gotten to be back in the studio, we did this cool class huddle collaboration, and I was moving next to one of the instructors, and you feel the community, even though they're not physically there, you feel them.
Wow. Yeah, no, I have so many people who have said that they love it, but
Yeah.
when I was reading your description, I don't know if I could do the whole yelling grunt. I don't
You
know.
know, I didn't at first,
Okay.
and I thought it was totally weird. And then, it's all like your comfort level. Some people feel very comfortable being very vocal. And part of it, I'm sure there is some science between like literally using your voice as you're moving. And by the way, like the first time I did the class, I hated it. And it took me 6 months before I went back, but then I was hooked. You just have to try it, Zibby,
Okay.
one time.
All right. Well, maybe in the privacy of my home if they still offer it
Yes.
virtually with like the
Yes.
camera off or
Yes.
something.
Digital studio.
I feel
Digital
like
studio.
I've tried everything at this point. I don't know. I'm like yeah. Anyway, tell me also about this great moment you had with Allison Camerata,
Uh,
who, by the way, I met through a good friend of mine, Christina Alessi, who was at CNN. I
uh,
don't know if you know her or not.
yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Anyway, so she introduced me to Allison a while back, and she's been amazing. And I was like so not surprised that like she's the one who was like
She's the
helping you
one.
through that moment. Like totally, of course.
She's
Tell me about that. As like,
Okay, so this is a perfect example. There are various huddles I highlight in this book, right? Everything from women's sports to politics to Hollywood to the space where women are trying to change some of these gun laws. And this is part of the section in the book where I'm talking about myself and my own huddles, and certainly my own huddles at CNN. And I had really this career highlight at CNN, and it would not have happened had it not been for my huddle. So what had happened in the last couple of years, there was a giant hurricane that was brewing off the coast of one of the Carolinas. And I've hosted this 2-hour show for a decade in the afternoon. And I am always in the studio, but any good journalist wants to be in the field for the big story. And the hurricane was the big story. And I knew that day that I would not be on my show. I was literally sitting at work knowing I wouldn't be on TV because I'd be booted because they had decided to put the 3 primetime anchors. They wanted to elevate the moment and put the primetime anchors in during the afternoon. That's when the hurricane was supposed to be making landfall. They were hoping to obviously up the viewership. And it just so happens that all of our primetime anchors are male. Now I'm irked. Okay. So number one, I'm irked. Number two, total coincidence. This whole thing coincides with this week at CNN. They do this once a week. It's a lovely thing. It's called Make You Matter Week. And lo and behold, who do they ask to be interviewed and made to matter? Me. So I'm sitting the day that I know I'm booted off my own show over this breakfast with mostly young women at CNN who all want to sit there and hear Allison Camerata, this wonderful, brilliant, CNN colleague and anchor, ask me all kinds of questions about how did you get to be where you are at CNN and what's it like to be a woman in journalism and all these things. And I was sitting there like silently sort of stewing, right? And I didn't want to let all these young women fully on to how I was feeling. We finished this whole interview. I invite myself into Allison's office where I fling myself onto her sofa. And basically I'm like, I'm so pissed. And please tell me how to handle this because I wish I was covering the hurricane. And what should I do? And Allison has a few years on me and she is cool, man. She is just like, girlfriend, I have covered my share of hurricanes. Like you do you, and you get out there and let me give you some pointers. And so she says, like, you need to go talk to the boss and you need to tell him, you need to say like, hey, why am I not there? And I'd love to, put me in coach. I'd love to be there for the next one. So take her advice, walk the 15 paces across the newsroom, go find my boss. And I'll never forget, I was like, why did you send all the boys? And he said, well, they were being a pain in my ass. And I, without missing a beat, was like, well, I can be a pain in your ass too. And he said, next time, Brooke, next time. And true to his word, a couple weeks later, comes back in my office. He's like, are your bags packed? I was like, well, why? He goes, you're getting on a plane tonight from LaGuardia going to Florida to cover this hurricane that's brewing in the Atlantic or in the Gulf. And so I do. And I go, and not only do I go, but I also have 2 other women who end up being instrumental as part of my CNN huddle, one of whom is really high up in logistics down in Atlanta, and another is my producer who's by my side. And we end up talking our way into a helicopter. It's such a long, other amazing story. But basically talking our way into a helicopter to get the first aerial footage of this town, Mexico Beach, for literally the entire world to see the aftermath. This ends up being like the worst hurricane that Florida's seen in a long time. And I end up getting like nominated for a bunch of awards for my coverage of this hurricane disaster. And that never would have happened had I not had my huddle at CNN.
Wow. Sometimes you just have to ask.
Sometimes you just have to ask, and you have to be vulnerable with your huddle to say, like, how can I, what should I do? I'm not feeling great about this. I feel talented. Why was I not, and by doing that, then you ask, and true to his word.
It's so funny because as a viewer, I always am like, oh, I feel so bad for the people who got this hurricane assignment.
Oh, no.
As they have like the wind whipping and they're like
flying. They want to be there.
No, I'm like, what? Really? Okay.
I'm yeah.
Like, what short stick did that guy draw or whatever? He's like being pelted.
Yeah. People want to be. You want to be in the middle of the big story, whatever the big story is. Whatever the big story is.
Wow. And what about when you're in a story where your own emotions are completely swept up in it? How do you handle that?
Well, you mentioned Parkland a second ago. I remember being live in Parkland the day after the shooting had happened, and I had Congressman Ted Deutsch standing to my left, and a correspondent was tossing back to me, and we had just played this clip of this mother. I'll never, ever forget the sound of her shrieking as she had found out her 15-year-old daughter had been killed. Ugh. And they toss it back to me fresh out of this soundbite. And I couldn't say anything. Like, there were no words for that moment. And I quickly try to bring the congressman in so we can share the moment together. And we both wept on television. And it's taken me years of doing what I do to feel like it's okay to just show myself, because this is a very real, very tragic human moment. And you just allow yourself to feel the things and to try to, be the best you can be as a journalist, to interview then the congressman about how the hell does this happen at a high school in America. Those are the moments that you can't not feel it. And you don't always physically emote. I remember being in Newtown and seeing tiny white caskets being wheeled out of a funeral home, and I kept my distance. But I remember going back, I was living in Atlanta at the time, and like had finished that entire assignment and went back home and just like didn't bother flipping the lights on in my high-rise apartment. And I watched the sunset that day, and I had this one song playing on repeat and just wept, thinking of those families and those children who would never see the sunset again. And you just have to be human, right? As a journalist, like, we're all human, and this is a horrible, horrible thing that keeps happening in this country. And that's why I wanted to I wrote about that in my book. And I wrote about, as a result of covering these tragedies over and over, like organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, and how that's a huddle, like Shannon Watts and Lucy McBath, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, that's a huddle. 6 million women and men, now the largest grassroots huddle in America, Moms Demand Action. Like, that was really important to include them in my book too.
Have you ever thought about going into politics?
So weird. No one has ever asked me that until literally the last week. And I always say, like, no, I think I'm way more comfortable, interviewing politicians than being one myself.
No, really? Okay. So. I don't know. You just have this like very, you're obviously such a leader, and the way you talk about different social issues, I could just, I don't know.
What a giant compliment. I am.
No, you seem very like a leader, maybe from your student council days. I don't know. It's a carryover or something.
A few times in high school, not humble brag.
Okay. Did you ever, like, was writing a book always on your list? Like, one day I'll do that, or did this come out of nowhere? Or was it like, I hope someday I do that?
It was like, I hope someday I'll do that. It wasn't always like, I have to be an author. It was like, I hope someday there will be a thing that I will care about so much that I'll want to write about it. I want to, dive into the deep end. And then that thing came, and so I spent my 2 years working on this book.
I should have worn my t-shirt. I meant to wear my t-shirt to this interview. Oh my gosh, I just remembered right now. I know, because I was thinking in my head as you were talking, I was like, well, I want to like make the huddle expression even more mainstream, like the way that you call the huddle with your friends. Like I just,
Yes, I would love, like, that is honestly, Zippy, like, that's my goal. I want to like add this word to our vocabulary. I want it to be part of our lexicon as women. I was joking with somebody the other day, like, I will feel like my job is done when I'm sitting at a sidewalk cafe in the city and I hear somebody like a table of women next to me being like, so did you huddle? Like, are we going to huddle this weekend? Or, just, it's a noun, it's a verb. It's where women come together or, energized by the mere fact of their coexistence. And to think that it could be, I'm hoping some sort of movement among women where women can know, like, we don't all have to have sharp elbows and compete for few positions at a table. Like, so many of us have had to do for so long, like, having crisscross this country and talk to so many successful women. Like, the through line is that they, what someone else's success is their success. Like, lean on one another, abundance mentality. As Megan Rapinoe says, throw down your ladders if you have access to success. Like, that's what I'm trying to, put out there.
I love that. So do you have any advice to aspiring authors?
Advice to aspiring authors. Because this is like a no duh, but because it's such hard work, I did this whole thing, obviously the news cycle has been super slow. No. I really wanted to do it. So, when I was booking all these plane tickets in the before times and traveling all these weekends in the middle of all these crazy weeks of covering the Trump administration and impeachment and everything else, like, I wanted to do it. Like, I was almost, Zibby, like I was possessed. Not to mention self-serving. I like sitting around with these women from like Chef Dominique Crenn to Megan Rapinoe to, Stacey Abrams, no skin off my back. Like, I'll do that. Right.
Yeah.
But you have to want to do it and you have to want to go deep. And you also, I would say, like, stay true to yourself. Your literary agent or someone else might say, oh, well, like, this is really hot right now in this genre. So like, you need to kind of curtail. And I just remember, like, I love my literary agent, but, there were times where I'd be like, I'm a journalist. Like, I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a researcher. I'm a journalist. And just staying true to yourself as you are going deep in the thing. And, to have, I still look at this and I'm like, holy shit. It's pretty cool.
It's awesome. It's great. It's really awesome. And then last question. So on the journalism front, so like, what is coming next now?
Yes. Well, honestly, what is next is a 3-week vacation in the British Virgin Islands.
Ooh.
That in my head is number one.
Oh my gosh.
I left CNN 5 seconds ago. I was there for an incredible run, 13 years, and I need a break. I just need some meditating and like, I need to read some novels and like to take some me time. After that, I do not know yet. I've started to get some interesting phone calls. What I do know is that I want to dive into the deep end of storytelling. I was so spoiled getting to talk to these women. When you do live TV, it's like 5 minutes, boom, move on to the next. 5 minutes, boom, move on to the next. And with this book, sitting with these women for an hour or hours, and then we'd finish, and then I'd turn the tape recorder off, and they'd be like, whoa, Brooke, like, we need to know about you and who's in your huddle and why are you writing this book and what's it like being a woman in journalism. And I was just like, it changed my life. Those conversations changed my life. And so what I do know is that I want to dive in deep, like I did with this book, and spotlighting, famous or ordinary, extraordinary Americans. I don't totally know yet beyond that what it will look like, but stay tuned.
I will. I'll be following along. Awesome. Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
I loved it. If you ever need a British Virgin Island going,
you're welcome to fit in my suitcase.
Chuck my life, and that sounds amazing. So anyway, I'm kidding, but have fun. It'll be great.
Thank you. And thank you for highlighting my book. It means the world, Zibby. Truly.
No problem. All right. Everybody pick up Huddle.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.